right, great. We've got Eric Hunley here on the podcast. Man, I am so excited to finally be able to talk to you. It's a joy. It's a joy.
Oh, thank you.
Well, so let me start with it now. You were born and raised in Arizona, is that correct?
Yes, Tucson.
Tucson, okay. And then after you went out of high school, did you? I know you have some military background in there. What was things after high school like for you?
I had a small wandering window where graduated high school, decided I wanted to work on cruise ships. I went to Florida for a BS travel school, wound up working at Alamo Rent-A-Car, was broke, went back home to Tucson, wandered around a little more, working at the grocery store again, moved to Kansas, Manhattan, Kansas, over by Fort Riley.
Okay.
With the girl I was seeing at the time. And there I was trying to get on with the newspaper or freelance articles and things like that. Wasn't very successful, and ultimately then enlisted into the Army and kind of took off from there.
So how long were you with the Army?
I was only in the Army for, well, not quite 8 years, because I had to do the inactive reserve time, but one full enlistment and then a re-up. So,
okay, all right. So 2 hitches, so to speak.
Yeah. I went in 92, and I want to say that I got out in like 98, 99. So.
Okay. So now, also, I've watched a bunch of your podcasts. And you allude to a little time at Gitmo, where you were working, not being, stored.
Well, this is ironically, Camp Xray existed while I was there.
Okay.
But it was not for the purpose of, how do I put it? A suspected terrorist, I guess is what I'd say. Now, at that time, it was for people who had already come into the United States from Cuba, but had been expelled or deported, or I don't remember what the term is for it, but essentially they had committed crimes or done something and got kicked right back out. So they were coming back in. It was like, oh, wait a minute, we know you. So they kind of got housed over in Camp Xray.
Okay. Any other interesting experiences in the military? Where else were you stationed?
I went from Fort Irwin, which is a hole, to ultimately Fort Story, which is nearer to where I am right now.
Okay.
And that one was a complete turnaround. I hated my job and I hated my duty station. So only way to get out of both, because you can only choose one, was to find a job that did not exist in my crappy duty station. So I picked a job that was in only 2 places in the entire country. And that would be either Fort Eustis, Newport News, or Fort Story, Virginia Beach. And I accidentally moved on the Virginia Beach side of the tunnel, and it just was easier for them to assign me to the duty station that I wanted, and things worked out.
That worked out good. And so now you work in IT. When did you get that background? Did you go to college? Did they train you in the military? Where did you get those skills?
It's kind of an amusing story, because in the Army, when I was at Fort Story, I was the training NCO, and one of the jobs was to put up, PowerPoint presentations, because they were the sacred, holy coming to all in command briefings.
Oh yeah.
And
I'm a PowerPoint was something else back in the day.
Oh yeah, it was everything. But I'm a little bit OCD, and I script to save, and I got a hold of a handheld scanner. So keep in mind, this is in the 90s.
Yeah.
So I scanned graphics, but then I'm so anal, I can't stand any overage or whatever. So I'm sort of picking at it pixel by pixel by pixel. So my presentations look good. Because my presentations look good, that meant I knew everything about computers to the command.
Yeah. Especially a lot of young people don't understand that, like back in the 90s, if you knew how to turn one on, for most of the people out in the work environment, you were like a genius computer expert. I mean, knowing how to operate, Windows just halfway was equivalent to a PhD in computer science to a lot of folks back then,
Yeah, essentially. And then like the captain's computer went down, I would work on it, be on the phone with Gateway, at that time, Gateway 2000.
Yeah.
It was a pretty cool, hip company. And they happened to be in the area. So ironically, I worked on it, and then I applied for Gateway.
Okay.
And became a tech support person there, and they trained me. I had an aptitude for it, so it wasn't just a matter, but I do think it's funny. I didn't really have the knowledge. I gained the knowledge as I did it. It's one of those, it's a weird habit I have of sometimes stepping into something and figuring it out after I get there.
Well, it seems to have worked pretty well for you thus far anyway. So now also in some of my background, I noticed that you wrote either 3 or 4 books. Is that correct?
Yes. Tech books, very boring, good nighttime reading.
Okay. Now, was the 4th one a tech book as well? Seemed like that one's a little less technical. All I saw was where you had a proposed 4th, but I don't know if that ever came to fruition.
Well, technically, I've got 3 books, and then one's translated into a couple languages. And now there's a 4th one that I was an narrator, if you're looking at audio books. And that was actually
I've picked up on that as too. Now, how did that come about? How did you end up getting?
He's a friend, and yeah, I mean, I'm supposed to do Chase Hughes ellipsis manual, and I just can never get the time to just sit there.
Okay, so it's your fault that I can't get that on audiobook. Okay, well, it's nice that have someone to focus my rage. That's good.
That's okay,
Derek. Tells me that's gonna be popping up in a super chat or two in the future. Okay, so now in my research I sent out asking for questions and what have you, and there was this guy named Lord Buckley that wanted me to ask when you joined the CIA.
When I joined,
when did you start your relationship with the CIA?
You were born into the CIA.
Okay. I
was gestated into it.
Yeah,
I can never leave, and I was always in.
That's it. Well, according to on America's Untold Stories, according to a couple of episodes you guys have, that's kind of the way they like to do it. So
in a sense, they love family.
Yeah, and for those that are watching this and don't understand the reference of Lord Buckley, I was joking about that. He is Eric's co-host on America's Untold Stories, and he kind of ribs Eric every once in a while about having a CIA involvement. So I mean, living in Virginia, I mean, you've got a lot of dots, as they say, that might connect there. I'm just saying.
He's not the only one. David Freiheit, Viva Frei.
Yeah.
Before I had him on, wanted to call me, and he thought I was CIA. So that's where some of this started out. And then on my channel, I've interviewed a bunch of CIA, a bunch of FBI, KGB too. So you could accuse me of being KGB, right?
Well, that's an interesting twist. I need to keep in back of my mind, I guess, about that, right? Oh man. So, and you also taught at the University of Arizona.
I did, yeah.
Classes. Okay.
Yeah, that was an interesting time. That actually led into the books that I wrote.
Okay.
And again, that was one of those stepping into something and then figuring it out as you go. When I was at Gateway, I was only there for about 6 months, and I got moved over as a network admin at desktop support, and then rolled that to network admin. And I'm pretty good at testing. So I took Master CNE, all the Novell courses, took Microsoft courses, took Cisco courses, took Flash courses. And at the University of Arizona, you had people graduating with electrical engineering degrees that couldn't get a job. So I was teaching them Cisco, and I was teaching them Novell, which is an ironic thing because I do not have a degree. I never got one. I don't look down on degrees. It's just I've never had the opportunity to really pull it off. I've done a lot of CLEPs, which is interesting because I managed to CLEP psychology, history, sociology, English, I think 3 other subjects without reading a book. But that's why I said I can kind of fake it through tests. Sometimes tests answer themselves. I don't know how to explain it.
Well, a very good working knowledge of a subject matter, from multiple sources. You may not have went through class per se, but and it seems like the items that you mentioned, you must have an interest in, because I see a reflection of a lot of that in your choices for podcasts that you put up, particularly on the Unstructured channel that you have. So, and now, so, you know, like how many channels do you have? Like 1,000 or something? I mean, what is it? It seems like every time, you
I'm at
know.
4 currently.
Okay. And so I know Laid Back News. I know of Eric Hunley Unstructured. I know of America's Untold Stories. And then is the other one you and Nate?
Yeah, Nate and Eric. Yep.
Yeah. And so how'd that go about going? Which of these were your first, and how'd this all kind of come in you? I'm assuming America's Untold Stories is probably the latest one. Is that
No?
No.
It's interesting. I'll try not to go on too long, but I started as a podcaster with the Unstructured podcast.
Okay.
And gave it a shot to do a video on YouTube with Chase Hughes. He wanted to do video and talked me into it. So I did a live stream with him and decided that it was so easy that I would just keep doing it on YouTube. And find out it wasn't very easy at all. But you know how that is. Dunning-Kruger in full effect. Week 1. Hey, this is easy. Week 2. Oh my God, what did I get into? Anyway, that was my story there. So, and I always had Eric Hunley as the URL, just owned or whatever. And I was trying to shift because when I started the podcast, I did it Unstructured. I did not want it. I wanted to be under something because I'm a nobody. I'm still a nobody. But I was like, what? But I learned over time, you kind of have to put your name out there that people relate to you as a person versus Unstructured, which is nebulous, and they're, you know, what the hell is that?
Right.
So I was kind of shifting and just went with Eric Hunley and then tagged on the Unstructured to roll them together, and sort of like a perennial brand shift. Now, ironically, at that time, everybody would say Eric Hunley's podcast and nobody knew the name Unstructured. As soon as I started to do the shift and do the channel, people started to refer to it as Unstructured. So I was like, okay, so now it sticks. How does that happen? But anyway, I did that for a while, and America's Untold Stories was, I had Mark on my show and we had a good time. And Mark is like a walking encyclopedia, like Robert.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I interviewed him. It's, like the best interview I've done. The only podcast I have that's done better than my interview with Mark was one where I was showing people how to get free money from the government with the disaster funds back in the day, you know, how to do your EIDL loan, you know, that one. I mean, he's running neck and neck with free money. So, I mean, he's a pretty talented, guy and quite a draw.
Yeah. And he's literally America's Untold. He's the star of it. I'm the guy who makes everything run on time, or try to. In that regard, though, we did it and we enjoyed it. And he's like, hey, I got a lot more stories. I was like, okay, we'll maybe do a monthly thing. But it was still on the Eric Hunley channel. Yeah. We did that like 2 or 3 times. And he comes up and he goes, hey, Hunley, this isn't going to work. I'm going to die before I get all these out. Right. We got to do something. So I decided at that point, it's like, well, wait a minute. If I'm going to do this with him like weekly or something, then I got to split this. It's not right that he just shows up and does things. So I started another channel with him, America's Untold Stories. And we're actually coming into the anniversary of that. Last year, I think it was September 29th that I started that channel.
Oh. Now, didn't you have a little trouble with YouTube initially? You had to like restart or something? I mean, I can see where Mark could get you in a little YouTube jail there.
He did not himself, but yes, literally after 3 weeks, the channel was growing like a weed. I mean, we had over 1,000 and it was doing very well. Boom, we got a triple copyright hit and the channel was vaporized. Oh. And I mean, it was just really early into it. It's like, geez, we just got going here. And it was all because of a documentary filmmaker. I used part of his coverage when I was doing analysis with body language for the Elliott Smith story. And I made the mistake of having that piece of footage in 3 videos. So he managed to strike me 3 times and the channel was gone before I could even react. Well, I thought about it. I was like, well, you know what? This channel's only a couple, 3 weeks old. Screw it. Let's just build it again. And meanwhile, I did have a counterclaim in about the copyright stuff on the original America's Untold Stories. So we started the channel again. quickly surpassed everywhere we were then before. And we started the channel again in October, right after the Baldwin shooting occurred.
Okay, yeah.
I think it might have been the day after, because I think that was Thursday, and I think I built it on Friday. It was like just impulse, boom, 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 let me just do it, get it up. And I traveled to see David, and when he was on Tim Pool, and that's when I met Dave, David and Robert Barnes.
Okay.
Anyway, so that is the current America's Untold Stories. We've managed to keep it up and going the whole time. Meanwhile, about a month in, all of a sudden, I won all my claims. So I had a channel, and that channel was like a couple hours from being monetized, and that took nothing to do. Went ahead and monetized it, and was going to make it a clips channel for America's Untold Stories, but yeah, it doesn't really bode well for clips. The CIA episodes are great for that because they're little pieces.
Yeah. But
overall, I think it really is better long form, because we're just covering too wide of a spectrum and too much.
And so some of these episodes, I mean, really kind of, I mean, I know you do, part 1, part 2, part 3. I mean, and even then it seems like, you could probably have part 10
probably,
and, be plenty of entertaining content.
Yeah, I mean, they go deep. I mean, Mark goes deep on these stories, but that's what, we've found kind of a little niche, and people really do appreciate that. And I do too. I mean, we have some conflict where people like Baldwin, people don't like Baldwin, people like Kennedy, people don't like, but what are you going to do?
And God forbid you mention Kilgallen and trigger Mark, Dorothy Kilgallen. Man, which is funny because I'm set up to interview Mark Shaw, who's the author that's basically, he wrote, I don't know how many books on Dorothy Kilgallen and the interaction there or whatever. So yeah, it's it's kind of a bit, man, that one really sends him over.
Well, he gets tired of people, and I understand it. It's like everybody has their own little irritation point.
Yeah.
And in general, some of it I laugh about, even though I can understand it. If you want to irritate Mark, this is the secret. Correct him and be wrong. That is the one, I'd say it's probably a number one thing that'll light Mark up. Now, I kind of, in general, I find it funny when somebody corrects me and I know they're wrong.
Yeah.
Because I just kind of am like, oh, they're an idiot.
Yeah.
I don't even have to acknowledge it. They don't even know what they're talking about. They're just wrong. Right. But Mark has been doing it for a long time. He's got like 30 plus years of research and everything else. So
yeah,
it does matter to him. Yeah. Me, not so much. I don't have reputational stake on that. I'm not an actual journalist with the, reputation. Mm-hmm. So I get it. They get at me too, through other little things, but that gets Mark.
So now you haven't actually met Mark in person, have you? Not yet?
Not yet. I will be in November, I think, your way.
Okay, yeah. You guys are there's some kind of JFK researchers conference, and there's 2, and you almost signed up for the wrong one or something. What was?
Yeah, there's a couple.
And what is the right one? So if anybody happens to be following and they want to get involved, what would be the good one and not the bad one? Certainly nothing from that Third Story Museum, but
I think it's called Kappa. Hold on. And you might want to put it in there because they are really running close on the tickets. Like, it may not go. We're still going to meet no matter what, but it's on Facebook at JFK Kappa. Or
spell that last name, Kappa? What?
Kappa, C-A-P-A.
C-A-P-A. Okay. It's on Facebook.
It's there, and then they have a conference page too. And I'll go and send you a link in the chat here.
Okay.
Because that would be great. A few people can go attend that. That might help. Cool. It actually, because some of the luminaries will be there. Like Cyril Wecht apparently will be there if it goes. Right. It's sort of his organization.
Okay. Well, that's cool. That'd be interesting. Yeah, I'd love to slide up there and meet you guys if the opportunity arises. So,
sure.
Now, you also have laid back news. Kind of what's the gist of that one? Seems to you have a lot of other folks that you interact with on that, but on a consistent basis.
Right. Now, a lot of this is just changing over time. But again, on my channel, I decided, hey, I want to do a weekly news show with Allison Morrow. And we did. It was News with Booze.
Yeah.
And the problem, though, I was having, and I kind of realized it over time, is that some of the politics and people I'm friends with lean a little bit right. And there can be a kind of a conflict with different audiences. And there's also some confusion. So a lot of the Eric Hunley channel is behavioral stuff. You know, reading body language, statement analysis, true crime, FBI, whatever.
Yeah, the Son of Sam series. Yeah.
Yep, Son of Sam. Sure, right. And they're all sort of in, a category, and they go together.
Right.
But then all of a sudden, there's this Wednesday news show where it's kind of ripping about the headlines and just talking about. It's like, what is this? This isn't body language. Why am I here? And I could just see that. Every time it would come out, I would gain a few people, lose a few people. And I think it was just causing confusion in the channel. So I happened to have a channel laying around that was fully monetized.
Right.
I thought, hey, let me go ahead and put the weekly news show on that. And then I thought about it again, because not only did I do the body language stuff, but I thought, well, I also do these legal panels because I'm friends with all these lawyers.
Right.
Well, everything in the legal panel and everything on the weekly news is current.
Right.
Versus Eric Hunley, that's evergreen. Son of Sam crimes, they took place in the 70s. We still talk about them. Body language. Well, you still will read body language tomorrow, just like you do today. It all is relevant. So it's like, there's a natural split here. And so I took that also off my channel and put that on Layback News.
And so now, why do I feel like you're part of what's being called LawTube, but you're not a lawyer?
Yeah, I'm considered part of it, sort of, because of the panels, and I'm friends with them. I mean, when I have a legal panel, like a panel every other week with the biggest names in LawTube, it sort of puts me with them.
So now, how did you develop these relationships? Did they just, over time, you just happened to ask, they happened to say yes and went on, or was there any, did you have to chase them down a little, or what? How did this develop?
No, it was pretty organic, really. Started with David, and I'm, genuinely good friends with David at this point. And with David comes Barnes. Yeah. And I get on, great with Barnes. Is amazing.
Oh yeah, for sure.
And then Nate. Okay. And Nate and I have gotten really close.
Yeah, you guys have the channel together, right? Yeah. You posted something recently.
That recently, but we actually were doing it on locals first, and that's why we spun out the channel. Is because we were getting just amazing feedback from locals. So it's like, okay, we're doing a show on locals, little locals, and getting 1,000+ views per episode on a little side network, and a lot of reaction. People they liked the way we interacted. So it was like, we've got something here. Well, why don't we give it a shot? So that's how that went.
So okay, so you got Eric Hunley, you got the channel with Nate, you've got the Americas Untold Stories, and you had the main Eric Hunley Unstructured. Okay, so Eric, let me explain this to you. There's something called a curve, and you're making the rest of us look really bad. So, if YouTubers getting graded on a curve, you're throwing all of this great content out. You're setting that bar a little too high for the rest of us. And I'm gonna maybe propose a YouTube union so we can rein you back in, the way they used to do with the car guys back in the '80s or whatever, right?
No, I just cheat. I have good co-hosts.
Right. So now let me ask you, as far as your research, now I understand you married a librarian. Has that helped you? She helped you with the research, or is it?
No, ironically. No, I mean, that's how I found her. Is that I'm a voracious reader, but now really a voracious listener when I have time. I literally have not been able to read a print book in almost 20 years.
Yeah. So, so now let me ask you, what made you decide to start doing podcasting? I guess initially, and then it evolved into YouTube. But what made you? What kind of you just wake up one day and go, "Hey, I'd like to talk to people on the internet," or what?
No, I almost always wanted to, all the way back to the Oddies. So I was listening to podcasts not when they first were created, but within a year or two after. So podcast started late 2004-ish, I believe.
Probably.
And I was listening, I'd say in 2006 to Mac Break Weekly. What was it? It was called The Talk Show at the time. I think it's still The Talk Show, but very a lot of Mac oriented podcasts. And I was thinking, oh, I'd like to do a show and, talk about, equipment and whatever. Because I felt like, I wrote the books, I could do this, it could be interesting. But I thought about it, I was like, nah, kind of, these guys have it covered. They know what they're doing, they know what they're talking about. Who's going to listen to me? So I didn't. Then I got involved with running a few years later, lost a whole bunch of weight, which I pretty much gained back, another story, and was going to do a running podcast. I thought, I'm going to do a running podcast. That'll be cool. I even appeared on a couple running podcasts because I lost a ton of weight, ran some marathons, and that was of some interest. And every time I get started, I take the next step, I buy another piece of equipment. Never actually using the equipment. As a matter of fact, I don't think I used any of the equipment I initially bought for podcasting ever.
Right.
I of course, right. So I did that, and it was like, I'm going to get tired of that. There's only so much I could talk about with running. Now, when it comes to my training, I'm obsessive, and that's interesting, but I start to get bored when I have to talk about other stuff with it. So I'm probably not going to do that. And back to it. So then I, oddly enough, discovered a podcast called Mixed Mental Arts because of Sam Harris bitching about a guy named Hunter Motz. And that was on Joe Rogan. So Sam Harris is bitching about Hunter Motz on Joe Rogan because Hunter called him out. Not necessarily fair, but anyway, Sam's a dick, so I don't really care anyway. But it just, I'm weird enough that I go, wonder what the fuss is about.
Right.
Let me go listen. And it turns out that Hunter Motz was a co-host of a podcast with Brian Callen.
Oh, okay.
Which was the Brian Callen show, became Mixed Mental Arts. And that blew me away because they were interviewing authors like David Haidt and other luminaries, great minds. And I was like, I want to talk to these authors.
Yeah. And you were on his podcast, weren't you? Didn't I catch you on Callen's podcast?
I think that my interview with Hunter made it into their feed somehow. Okay. It's kind of a mess, but I've never spoken to Callen, ironically.
Okay.
Hunter I talked with a lot. There was like a Facebook group, and it was a bunch of I don't want to be rude, but there's a certain intellectual type out there that they're brilliant, but they're not always up on social cues. I don't know how to put it.
Yeah.
I'm not as smart as they are, but I was thinking that it would be cool if I could do a show and talk to these authors and maybe ask questions of my own that maybe aren't as well crafted or deep or thoughtful, but maybe more accessible to the public.
More interesting to the general masses.
Yeah, after a fashion. So my thought was that what I actually envisioned was, and I almost used the name Idea Pub, where we go into a pub together. I'm sitting down, whatever. I meet somebody and you tell me something about yourself. And I'm like, really? What's that about? And then I'd envision the audience being like the person in the next table, just kind of overhearing what we're talking about.
Right. Yeah.
So that was the idea, the form, everything, where it'd be conversational versus a straight interview. which are tedious, and we just chat.
Yeah, they certainly can be, because especially if somebody drops something interesting, and if somebody's just going by a list, going, okay, I got from number 1 to number 2, and then
Right.
but it's like, whoa, stop! He just said something about his best friend dying. What's going on with that?
Absolutely.
Yeah. I like the interaction, the ability to kind of go off of what is happening in the moment, the interview like that, instead of just kind of the talking points that you see. And I think that's maybe one of the downfalls of a lot of mainstream media right now, is that they're still in that kind of that old process of going through and putting out content that's very, very structured and not unstructured. But now, how do you decide who to interview? How does that pop up?
It depends on the point of time. I mean, early on, it's kind of, well, can I get them?
Right.
I mean, there's a certain arc of it where you can't just immediately go swing for the fences. Yeah, try, sure, but rather than saying, "Oh, let me try to get this big name," why don't you get another person just interesting, and then build up a relationship there, a reputation, and it can go from there. A good example is other podcasters. They're always looking for the opportunity to get their voice out, to get their show known, whatever. So I interviewed Jerry Williams, who was the FBI case files or retired FBI case files review or something like that. She's a retired FBI agent. Well, it's a great way to meet FBI agents if you interview a podcaster who does nothing but interview retired FBI agents. And I did. She liked the interview, and I said, "Hey, is there anybody?" She goes, "Oh, you can talk to these two. They always love talking." I talked to those two. Now I have 3 FBI agents, and I approached Chris Voss, big name. Okay, he came on. Now he's a bigger name now than he was then, but the point still stands.
Right.
So then now you have the 3, and I have Chris Voss. By the way, all 4 interesting interviews, all 4 great knowledge. But then now I have these 4. I leveraged that into Robin Drake, for example, and I've been interviewed for his show. So it all compounds upon that.
Now, would you say you're at a point right now where you can pretty well get an interview with anybody that you want to, or most, or?
No, not at all.
Well, the reason I ask is because you have what is, a really, I would have thought impossible to get an interview, and that was the one with McAfee. Maybe was that like his last one, or?
No, but it's funny. You'll if you look on YouTube, you'll see he has 400 final interviews.
Oh, okay.
Or something. I did not do that. I can't stand that clickbait, but no, I interviewed him April, either March 30th or April 1st, right in there in 2020. I know for a fact that he did at least Adam Carolla, I think, after he did mine, and he's done others. I mean, I'm happy with my interview. It was good enough to be used in the documentary. From it, so that's cool. But I'm not going to pretend that it was, the be all end all. And he forgot my name, I'm sure, the second it ended.
Right. Well, but now and then you've done a couple of more podcasts discussing McAfee in various levels. And so let me just, since you spent a little time, you talked to him one-on-one, you spent some time discussing him and researched it. What do you think? Did he kill himself or not?
With him, it can be anything. I think that there's problems with all sides of the argument. And I could argue any of them because of him. So no, he didn't kill himself because he's too arrogant. He'd want to be on trial, and he'd want to face the crowd because he liked the spotlight. He would love it. He would be strutting in the courts, cameras following behind, all that, right?
Yeah.
Well, but then the flip side, he did it on the day of extradition if he did it. And that will forever have his name tied in with a mystery. He's taking whatever secrets he has with him, whatever Bitcoins and whatever reputation, and has forever cemented himself as this kind of mythical figure. So he created a legend by doing that, if he did.
Mm-hmm.
Then there's the third one that no, he didn't kill himself, and no, he wasn't killed. He's still alive and working with the CIA or somewhere else, which, by the way, he did work with spooks a few times in his career. So there's good possibility for deep state, especially with his Bitcoin ties.
Mm-hmm.
They could just be using him. What substantiates that? Well, coincidentally, Spain will not release his body. Well, you can't release something you don't have, so maybe he's alive. I don't know. So there's your three scenarios, and I can argue all three of them, and I can believe all three of them.
Yeah. But, you know, and honestly, that's the great thing from a character or historical figure about that guy, man. I mean, he is just incredibly interesting, all of the stuff that's gone on with him from beginning to possible end. Right? I mean,
he's like a modern pirate.
Yeah, he's man, yeah, he's interesting. That's for sure. Now, so now you collaborate with a lot of folks, like you said, Viva and Barnes and all of the different folks. What are some people that you would really like to get a hold of and maybe, you know, move into your sphere that you haven't either gotten around to or haven't had a chance to, or what have you? Kind of who's out there on your strike list?
That's a good question. Today I'm actually collaborating with a really young YouTuber, Edwin's generation, very young and upcoming, and we're doing a collab which could be seen as contentious, but not. I don't play that way. Because I cover a lot of Marilyn Manson stuff right now,
right?
And I think that there's problems with the accusers and their cases. Edwin is a full-on, you know, Manson did it, bad dude, blah, 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 blah. So invite him on. But anyway, that's kind of collaboration. Now, as far as people go, you really stymie me on that. I'd love to meet like Jordan Peterson. I'd love to obviously meet Joe Rogan, you know, throw the big names out there. But I guess I don't really think about it too much because it's like, well, they're out of reach.
Right.
And hopefully they'll come into reach. You know, like I'd love to have Alex Jones on sometime. I know Mark would love to have Alex Jones on sometime.
Yeah.
A lot of my audience will flip their lids because I have kind of a bifurcated audience. But again, I don't know. You know, people interviewed Castro. You know, people interview. You should be able to interview anybody in the world. I interviewed Carol Baskin.
Yeah.
And some of it is just, yeah, it's opportunistic. I try not to really think about it and pine over people because I assume that I probably won't get them, or you know what, I'll come onto their radar at some point and they'll just want to do it. If that makes sense.
Sure. Yeah. Now, so how do you go about structuring how you know, do the people at this point come to you, or do you have to go to them, or what's that process like as far as, you know, deciding, you know, who's going to be on what? I mean, you know, some of your shows don't, but like, you know, Unstructured, yeah, you know, you're reaching or you're adding new different twists and what have you.
Yeah, it's weird because it used to be that I would go seek out a guest, do a ton of research, interview the guest, do the show. Now I have a lot more of a repeat type of thing, a lot more of a panel type of situation, just kind of a lot more of a peer group where we hang out and maybe discover things together. So, for example, Eric Hunley Unstructured, whatever. I've had Rob of Law and Lumber, who's relatively new to the scene. We've just gotten on really well. And then Spidey, who I've gotten on really well with. And we get together with like Alita of Legal Bites. So it's just kind of this, again, it's kind of organic. Like, oh, these are my buddies, and oh, are they available? And they like to hang out together. So you, like, that's part of it too. It's like, especially with panels, does this person like this person? Sometimes you have to have a little flow chart. Like if such and such is, you can't do such as, and I can't go into all that, but it is a matter of chemistry. And I think that my talent, if I have any, is that I can give as little or as much as I need to in a presentation. And the case being with Mark, shut up and stand back.
Right. Yeah.
Let Mark shine, help the spotlight stay on him, and go to take away his obstacles.
You just find the picture he's talking about right then and get it up there, right? I mean,
get it up there, maybe react a little bit so he's not talking to himself, because that's not fun. And that's it.
Yeah.
Now, with the lawyers, try to balance it out, control the show some, but not some, and get everybody talking, get everybody participating. But bottom line, have everybody have fun. Like they're all part of it. Like they want to come back. That's really my goal in life. Anytime I do the legal panels, especially, is just, did they have fun? Yeah. So if everybody had fun, everybody wants to do it again.
Sure.
And that's not work. That's one show I do zero prep for. My prep will be like, I guess we could talk about this today. I don't know. And then, and it just goes. And again, it's good personalities that go together and things happen. It's fun. Nate and Eric is interesting because Nate and I have grown a really pretty deep friendship, in the sense of we get on the phone and then argue for 2 hours.
Right.
And I know that's odd, but that is a friendship. It's not a bickering, but it's a debate or challenging on each other's points. And we're like, oh, you know what? We should actually make something out of it. And we did a show called No Holds Barred on my locals. And the people really like that too. So we spun out the Nate and Eric. And that one, I give as much as I take. I mean, it's a full on 50-50. Sometimes I dominate, sometimes he dominates, but it's, very much a back and forth. So every show is different. And I'd like to think that that's kind of my ability, is to put people together, get along, and find a place without overwhelming or being a pain in the ass. Yeah. And that's the win.
Yeah. So now, are people reaching out to you now to be on your podcast or anything like that? Or is that, I'm sure some have, but how often does that happen, that somebody says, hey man, I want to get on?
It doesn't happen as much. It happens all the time in terms of booking agencies are always throwing people at me, and I'm pretty much, no, pass, because it won't fit. And the podcast, it kind of comes and goes. It's not my priority in any way. I'm so tilted into the YouTube area that I don't have the time. So something's got to give. Tends to be the podcast. Tends to be other things like that. Like I had a really complex website. I found something that does an automatic pull for my feed, sticks it on the page. I said, okay, that's it. That's my site now. And trying to find ways to make stuff work. But as far as people go, they reach out to try to come out, with a podcast, or there may be some people wanting to collab, because that's a YouTube thing, is to collab.
Right.
So there's a guesting, which is the podcasting thing. Mm-hmm. There's some of that, but it's kind of like, it's just friends, I just know some, different people. It's like, hey, and then you slowly, the circle sort of extends, like, okay, this person knows this person, and you go, oh, okay, can I get them on? And then we see how it goes. Yeah.
So, let's see what I had here. Yeah. So now, what would be your most challenging podcast that you did? Let's go, just keep it to the YouTube world. What was your most challenging YouTube episode to post, and what made it?
I had one, and God forbid, I keep forgetting his name, but it was Doug something. He is the person, he died. He was my first guest to die too.
Oh my goodness.
Not on the show, but he passed away. But he was the one who went to prison for teaching somebody how to beat the polygraph. And his mission in life was talking about the polygraph. He helped get it. He went in front of Congress and was involved in making it no longer admissible in court, no longer to be used by corporations. Can't keep it out of the government, mind you, but
right.
Got it at least, with legitimate business things, that they can't use it. He pretty much came across me. He thought I was a moron. And he made no bones about it. Was extremely abrupt, very challenging. hardest interview I ever had. And it was kind of sad, but later he's like, I think he was like, I think you saw it on tweets. I was the hardest interview. What was wrong with you, you P word? Just anyway. And then I came to find out it was like, no, he was just that way, apparently. But part of what fed into it was Jordan Harbinger, who is a very big time podcaster. I had talked with him about the guy too, and he's like, oh yeah, he's I think the word was crazy.
Yeah.
But
yeah, sometimes those can be. So what's the one that you're the most proud of that you've done? You're like, oh man, there you go. That's the way it's done. That's going to be here. I'm assuming it's an evergreen one, or at least it would be for me, right? One that is going to be here long after I'm gone, and people are still finding some value out of it.
It's funny because I have different reasons to favor things. Like the funnest interview I ever did was a podcast with Jocelyn Stone, who is an adult entertainer. She doesn't like the term porn star.
Yeah.
She's like, I'm not a star. And she has zero filter. And it was just spit take funny. It was so freaking funny. It was amazing. That one I really appreciate because of the funniest, most fun I've ever had. Chris Voss's interview is a standout to me because I wasn't aware of what he said half of the interview.
Okay. Because he talked over you, or what was?
No, it was a technical issue.
Yeah, okay.
So I was using some software called Squadcast, shout out to them, which will record both ends locally in the software. But the connection was so bad that I was trying to time it with his lips and catch occasional words here and there to ask the next question and pray I got it right. And at the end of it, it was a solid interview and nobody would ever know.
Oh yeah, that's got to be yeah.
So that one could fall into the most challenging in some ways, but also an achievement. Right. Then I would say my third one probably would be Jim Clemente, another FBI agent, and that was a journey of an interview. We went really deep through his life and into 9/11 and how he got so sick afterwards and he died on the table. And it's one of those that just we hit this rhythm, and it was a really profound experience. Like you just walked away knowing, I was in the middle of something really, really special that time. And he actually has it listed on his Wikipedia entry. He's one of the producers of Criminal Minds now, or former. But I guess that would be a good 3 comparison.
Now you do a lot of live streaming now. Is that not what you've done in the past? What was your thought about that, or what are your thoughts on live streaming versus shooting it ahead of time and editing it and that kind of stuff? And
well, I'm all over the place. The live streams I sort of did the majority of time, and probably still do. And the idea of that is in some ways so I don't have to edit. It is here it is, boom, start to finish, we're done. We do it live, cool. Americas Untold Stories is kind of a unique formula. It's almost like a live stream documentary, if that makes sense. And we thought
that's a really good term for what that is. Yeah.
Okay, and that's sort of our intent, and having the riff and there's a certain energy to live. Like when I screw up, I'm not taking it back. It's out there. My words right now, they're out there, in the middle of a live stream.
Yeah.
So if I follow my ass, I follow my ass, and it's recorded forever, and I have all the witnesses. It is what it is. But that gives a certain edge. It gives a certain little danger that I think increases the energy. Like Drive Time Radio had that back in the day because, again, they were live on the broadcast. Now, I don't care for polished material as much, especially now. I've grown to love those accidental moments, those word slips, or those turns of phrases that just come out organically that nobody expected. And if you think about it, I don't remember who said it, but they're right. I think it might have been Norm Macdonald, but the hardest you ever laugh is with your family on a holiday.
Mm-hmm.
And those are the genuine laughs.
Mm-hmm.
They're not a polished routine.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like live kind of marries the two, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, you know, even if you look back like the old Tonight shows with Johnny Carson, the ones that are probably the most, I think there's one particularly with Dean Martin in there where, you know, he's clearly toasted, right? And he just stumbles in and what, you know, I think appears to be somewhat off the cuff. And that's probably one of the greatest moments in television history, as far as I'm concerned. I mean, you know, and I think a lot, that's something that, you know, obviously Johnny had a lot of polish. He was extremely talented, so he was able to really make those sort of things come out spontaneously, and he was really good about pulling the humor out of those things. But yeah,
he was also very giving. One thing I got to give Johnny Carson is he let them shine.
Right.
He's not like a lot of other people, and I try to be the same if I can, where he lets the guests be magnificent. He figures I've got the job. I'm here every day. I'm already the winner. Let them shine. And because he did that, that showcasing of the guests made that the spot to go, because you would go there, you would get the light on you, and Johnny could sit back and be generous and be beloved at the same time. And you mentioned Dean Martin. I was thinking Rodney Dangerfield, all of his appearances where it was a sport to make Johnny fall out.
Right. Yeah.
And I love all that. I love that kind of energy. And as an example, I actually liked a lot of the comedians' podcasts, like Joe Rogan, Bert Kreischer, blah, 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 blah. You know, I've listened to them. I don't have time as much now, but those are funny, but I didn't care for most of their acts.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
But together riffing with their buddies, hilarious, just fun, but a polished, perfect presentation. Not as into it.
Yeah. Well, and you know, I know maybe it's just me, but I think that's more of what entertainment is moving towards. I know, you know, like, you know, my grandkids are, you know, junior high and high school, and the only things they watch are pretty much, you know, clips and things on YouTube. And, you know, I mean, they're not watching, you know, there's obviously we like movies and a few things like that, but still it's, you know, there's that authentic, you know, presentation of what's going on, I think has far more value now than it's had in the past. And I think that's what's made folks like you and Mark and, you know, a lot of other folks on YouTube very successful at it and very entertaining. That's for sure.
Well, thanks, man. I'm still working on it, though. Remember,
well,
I'm the poorest house in the biggest neighborhood.
Well, you know, you can add on to that thing, and next thing you know, you'll be bigger than the rest. But now, I did want to, before I got cut you, and I want to be sensitive to your time because I know you have limited amount.
Job.
But the Tommy Morrison interview with his ex-wife.
Yes, that's someone who reached out. Yes.
And now that was, you know, very, because I mean, obviously you know, I grew up and I boxed Golden Gloves a little bit, and you know, being a white kid, he was about the only one out there that you could look to and see. And then of course, obviously, he had media career, but yeah, I mean, just dispelling all those myths that were just laying out there that nobody ever seemed to take the time to.
They're still fighting about it in the comments, believe it or not. I mean, they're like, oh, he obviously, I'm like, there's pathology in the damn video. Did you watch it? So I just don't even acknowledge it. I let her go hammer it, but it is a funny thing because when I heard about the story, all I knew was that Tommy Morrison had HIV, then died of AIDS. Very sad. I mean, it's very sad. I'm not.
Yeah, no.
Then to find out that, wait a minute, the whole premise of everything was a lie. That's a story. You know, now that becomes something. Yeah, and that of course attracted me. But then there were other factors too. Like I'm talking to his widow here.
Yeah,
there needs to be some decorum and
Yeah.
and care again, because this is her story. She's been fighting tooth and nail, and I felt bad because we had to cut it at the end, and that actually got left in there, which is not cool because it made me look like the biggest dick on the planet. But what had happened was we kept getting cut off because her phone would fill up, and I was recording an app so it looked nice and clean, but it kept filling up, and she had to keep getting cut off and then delete files to keep it going. I was like, we got to stop because this is gold. There's so much gold here. I've got to keep it in. So that's why there's an abruptish ending of my not, being able to go through all of it.
All right. Well, Eric, man, I've had you for about an hour, and I think that's probably all I can really impose on you for. But I really do appreciate it, and I'm a big fan of all your channels, and
Thanks.
Look forward to maybe talking to you again in the future about anything that might come up that makes sense. And of course, feel free to reach out to me for anything that you might need or want. And I'd love to meet you guys in Dallas if there's time. And so, thanks a lot.
Awesome. Hey, it's great meeting you, man.
All right.